record on the computer. Okay, we're recording, fabulous. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name's Steph Brown. I'm a freelance digital marketer and I do a lot of work with Culture Central. So I'm here with my Culture Central hat on today to welcome you all to this Where's the Money At workshop with the fantastic Hazel Sealeaf. This week of workshops came about because we heard from a lot of young artists and creatives in the region that you really wanted more opportunities to connect and to upskill, and that actually a lot of these opportunities are quite few and far between. So we wanted to make steps to do something about that. So we have worked with a fantastic producer, Paige Jackson, who I'm sure many of you will know, who went out and asked the questions of exactly what was needed, what kind of topics would be most valuable. And one question that of course came up a lot was around accessing funding. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Hazel Sealeaf. Thank you so much for spending time today to tell us about this really important subject. Over to you.
Thanks very much. I now only have myself to blame if it all goes wrong, because I've been officially handed over responsibility. Yeah, hi, I'm Hazel. The one thing I didn't plan was how I was going to introduce myself, which might say something about me anyway. So I'm still technically in the bracket for this. So I'm 27, and I've kind of been working in the arts since I was 18. That career has been a mixture of kind of working as a freelancer and getting funding for my own projects, and working within art and cultural organizations and helping them get funding for projects, amongst other things. I think it's a really interesting time right now with funding. Arts Council has a new 10-year strategy. Everything is kind of weird and interesting and new, and there's potential for all sorts of changes to happen kind of post-pandemic, which would be really great to kind of talk to everyone about and see how that's going to go. See, I could only do a sentence about myself before I started talking about the reality of the creative and cultural industries. So I think that'll do. What I want to ask first, so I've over-prepared. I've got too much information, so I kind of need to narrow it down according to kind of who we've got in the room, and figuring out what you guys, what's going to be most useful for you. So if you're happy to, we'll just take it in turns to kind of say our name, our pronouns, and what we're hoping to get from today's session, either using the microphone or in chat, if that's what you would prefer. Does anybody want to go first? Sure. Hi, Miss Murphy.
Why not? Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela. It is Miss Murphy because I do a lot of online teaching, and it's just easier to keep that there. And my pronouns are she, her. And I'm here today, I guess, just to find like more information just about like the Arts Council process, about funding. It's my first time kind of doing an application, and I thought that I might, get as much information as I can, and to see the kind of ins and outs of what Arts Council funding is about, and just, yeah, to get more information, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michaela.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Henry. I'm also producing the same play with Michaela and another one of our friends. My personal pronouns are he, him, and yeah, similar to Michaela, really. I've never really done one. The other one of our friends who we're producing it with has written applications before, but not many. And yeah, we're just trying to collate as much information as possible to help us with our application.
Thanks very much. We've just had someone new join us. So hi, Paige. We're just starting by going around and sharing our name and pronouns and what we're hoping to get from today's session. You don't have to be next, but you're welcome to be if you would like to be.
I don't mind going next. Hi guys, my name is Paige. My pronouns are she, her. Oh, what I'm hoping to get out of this, just listen to some people who know what they're talking about talk to me about money. Thank you.
Somebody has replied in text, so I'll just read that out if that's okay. So Pearl has said, "Hi everyone, happy to be here. I don't have a working camera, unfortunately. You probably also don't have a walking camera, but that's fine. I'm Pearl, pronouns are she, her. I'm a writer and textiles artist looking for funding opportunities available for me as I don't know much about this area." Cool. Thank you very much, Pearl, and welcome. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. I'm Matilda, my pronouns are she, her. And I recently quite happily got made redundant, and I'm excited to be free from working on someone else's vision and ready to work on mine. And that's why I'm here.
Amazing. That's some serious clarity. Thank you, Matilda.
Shall I go next?
Sure. Hi, Emma.
Hi, my name's Emma, pronouns she, her. I'm a composer and sound artist specialising more so in sort of immersive 3D audio. More so today, just trying to find out what opportunities there are available and what routes I can potentially look for with regards to funding. Thank you.
Okay.
That just leaves me. Hello.
Hi, Joseph.
I'm Joseph. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a writer of all kinds, but mainly of short comedy films. And I've had basically an entire sketch show written for a while now. And we were about to film it at the start of 2020, pandemic. So it's very hard to film a sketch show when you can't have more than 6 people in a room. But as soon as I can, I want to know how I can get funding to do that. And that's why I'm here.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That's great, and that helps me. Feels like we're all at like quite similar places in terms of kind of first funding or potentially just kind of everybody's in kind of like a new phase or a phase of transition, which is really interesting. So what I have planned is I have a presentation. Sorry for people who hate presentations. Which is going to talk a little bit about the general funding landscape as a whole. It's going to talk about ways of starting to present your ideas and thinking about that process a little bit before figuring out the perfect funder for your project. And then we're going to be talking about the Arts Council applications specifically, so developing your creative practice and project grants. If you don't know what they are, the explanations are coming. Trying to think if there's anything else housekeeping-wise that I need to say beforehand. If you needed to leave at any point, that's absolutely fine. I think we are already recording, fantastic. So don't worry about leaving early. If you miss any information, the information will be available online afterwards. I think I was kind of in my head, I was planning on maybe having a break after 45 minutes for just 5 minutes. We'll see how people feel at that point. If that feels needed, then that's what we'll go for. So we'll just do a quick check-in. And if you guys want that break, then we'll take it. If not, then we will just plow on and see what comes after that. Anybody have any questions about the process before we just start? Cool. There's a lot of just information sharing at the start, but then hopefully we're going to be opening up to have kind of slightly more interactive conversations and questions that are more specific to your projects. Okay, sharing screen. Cool, where's the money at? Or help, there's so many forms is the title for the thing. So these are the major public funders. In the funding world, there's kind of, there's funding that is public money, there's funding that is private money, and there is, I guess, funding that's kind of community money, which is kind of crowdfunding and those types of things. So these are the kind of major funders who fund the types of projects that you'll probably be interested in. So Arts Council England fund almost everything arts related. heritage fund things to do with heritage, which, and a lot of people kind of think that means kind of like historical buildings and kind of immediately ignore the fact that it's there at all. But heritage is also things like cultural heritage and identity, and they will fund work that's about preserving or kind of documenting kind of heritage that is emerging, just as much as they will fund kind of historical buildings. And so lots of really successful arts projects don't just go into Arts Council, they can go into the Heritage Fund as well, and the others that are kind of on this list. The Community Fund used to be called the Big Lottery Fund. So they fund work that is specifically focusing on supporting local communities and neighborhoods, very broad remit. And there's often quite a lot of overlap between Arts Council and the Community Fund, because Arts Council also a lot of the time wants to be funding work that is benefiting communities and groups of people. So kind of traditionally and historically, things like the Community Fund are things like funding like social groups and social functions, developing skills in people, these types of projects. But they will very happily fund arts-related work as long as the kind of principal focus is that this is about helping a community. It's about helping a community, and arts is the method. Ideally, it's the method that that community has chosen themselves to develop the resilience of that community, or the skills in that community, or help that community solve a problem, and those types of things. Sport England funds everything sport related. I know nothing about them. Sorry if you were hoping for an arts sport hybrid project. I'm not going to be very helpful in telling you how to apply for sport funding, unfortunately. And then the BFI manage lottery funds relating to the making of films. Film is a little bit of a strange one in how it straddles both the BFI's remit and the Arts Council's remit at times. Technically, the situation is that Arts Council will not fund film, but they will fund digital work, which can include elements of film, particularly if what we're talking about is kind of, it's kind of a participatory project that's about film. So if you're talking about working with groups of people and they're going to be making films about their local areas or their local neighborhoods, or about their personal identities, whatever it happens to be, and film is the mechanism for that. That would probably fall under Arts Council. If you're looking to get funding for kind of a feature film, it's BFI that you need to be kind of looking at and thinking about. So those are the major public funders. Does anybody have any questions relating to this slide? I think this is a no. I can't see everyone at once while I'm sharing, so I'll probably be looking around. Okay, fab. Funding databases, charity commission, and logos. So this is about thinking about how you guys find the funding, essentially. And it's also, so those are the major funders, the public funders that I've talked about. There are other funders out there. Most of them are kind of private trusts and foundations. And they vary massively in size. Some are very small and it's quite difficult to understand them or what their processes are. Some of them are very large and are very transparent about their processes. And they're just as easy to apply for money for as it is to apply to the Arts Council for them. Funding Central, and I've got Get Grants up here as well, who are kind of a local based organization who help people get funding. They do training and they have their own funding database as well. Both of those are funding search engines. So you can use them to search for projects, to search for, I'm talking quite fast. I'm probably going to slow down as I get less nervous and settle into it more. Yeah, they help you search for funds. You can search by a vast range of different funding criteria. You can search by area that you're working in, art forms that you're interested in, the main purpose or issue that you're trying to tackle with your funding. You can search by the type of organization you're applying as, including individuals. Those are there. Feel free to go and have a look at them. They are ways of finding it. Logos I'll mention briefly as well, just because this is actually, I think, the most practically useful thing to just start doing. Every time you see a project that you're like, oh, that's a little bit like mine, or oh, that's a really interesting project, go to the bottom of the flyers and look at what logos are there and make a note of them. That's how I find most of the funders who I end up applying for, is scrolling to the bottom. Oh, there's something on the more. Somebody's put something in chat. Oh, this is irritating. Okay. Great tip. Thank you. I don't think I can get the chat to show up at the same time as I'm sharing the screen. I'm going to have to come up with times where I stop sharing the screen just to look at chat. That's slightly irritating. Okay, back to the presentation. Charity commission. I only learned this recently and I just put it in here for, this might not be useful now, but it will be useful for you eventually. Charity commission also has a search function, which I didn't know about, and it lets you search by the function of the charity. And one of the listed functions that charities can give is giving funding to other charities. So you can use that to, for example, you can go, I'm looking for a project in Coventry, show me all of the charities registered in Coventry whose main function is giving money who are interested in disability or interested in gender. And that will just give you like a list, probably of dozens of different registered charities that, that meet that criteria. Really, really useful. Wish I'd known it kind of earlier on. Might not be helpful to you guys now, but hopefully will be useful to you in the future. It's kind of it for general funding landscape. We're going to start talking more specifically about your projects and Arts Council from here. So I guess this would be a good time to ask you guys for, if you guys have questions, now would be a good time to ask them about the general funding landscape before we talk more specifically about Arts Council. Any questions? Cool. Oh, yeah, was that a hand, Joseph?
Yeah, so with appealing to this sort of fundings, I imagine especially today, is it all usually online, or is there any sort of face-to-face interaction or like pitch meetings like there might be? I suppose it's different for organisation.
Sure. Almost all major funders, and definitely the Arts Council, just operate through forms. No pitch meetings or anything of the sort. That might be different with the BFI, maybe. I'm less sure about how they... I think I froze for a second then. It is all online at the moment. There are ways of getting help and advice, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, from real humans. That's one of the kind of general principles I think to remember with all of this, is that behind these organizations' name, there are humans. You can reach the humans, you can talk to the humans. The humans want to help people. They want to make things happen. This isn't a case of trying to drag money out of people who want to do nothing more than sit on their thrones of gold or whatever. They want to be spending this money, and they want to be using this money to create wonderful things, exciting things, to be helping communities, to do all sorts of different things. Within Arts Council, there's usually phone support. Right now, that's kind of the only thing that's available, is communicating with people on online chat. There's usually telephone support. There are also individuals called relationship managers who work in two different ways. Some relationship managers work with specific organizations who get regular funding from Arts Council, and some are kind of area managers, and they look after essentially developing a specific art form in that region. And part of their remit will be kind of meeting people and talking about the Arts Council and what it does. It will be kind of signposting people. If you come to them with a project idea and you ask them, who do you think would be a good mentor for this project? They will answer those types of questions. They will answer questions about the eligibility of your project. They can't assess your project in any way before you submit it. They can't be like, I think you've got a good chance, or this doesn't look very good. But they can say, you know, like, this aspect of your project is ineligible. You need to fix it before you submit it. And they are very helpful and very giving people. Yeah, I encourage you, when the world is open again, to kind of, yeah, talk to funders, basically, is part of the takeaway there. Any other questions on that? Cool. Whew. And I found a way to get chat open as well. So if people want to send chat, that'd be great. Okay. Open question to people who want to answer. Why do you want funding for your project? If anybody wants to unmute and answer that question, or if people want to put their answers in the chat, both are welcome. You don't have to answer the question, obviously, but if a couple of people want to answer that question, that'd be really great. Why do you want funding? I saw Henry and Miss Murphy, Michaela, that was it. It's all right. Henry, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, Michaela and I actually did an R&D for a project, which this one that we're producing has kind of evolved out of, and we weren't in a position to pay anybody at the time, and we kind of wished that we were. And I mean, I'm you know, as an actor, I believe that not just actors but creatives as well we should all be paid for the work that we do, particularly as it's so difficult to get well-paid work at all in the industry at the best of times. Yeah. But also it just, you know, because we weren't paying anyone, we said obviously it's okay if you go off for auditions because we're not paying you. So it's unfair of us to say, no, you need to commit and stay here all day. So and that then affected the work as well. And I think we did extremely well with we made the best of what we had, you know, and I'm quite proud of that. But I think in order to take it to the next level and create a piece of work that we're proud of, and that we can also pay ourselves with as well, that's the goal, really.
Fab. Yeah. Any other answers to that question? I'm going to speak about what you said, Henry, but any other perspectives in the room? Matilda? I'll read out if that's okay. Ooh, sorry, a couple of people put things in. Pearl asked, is it possible to get funding for paying for equipment that will advance your creative practice? Yes. And we can talk more about that in a little while. Matilda, I have a couple of reasons. There's not many people making work in my city, Wolverhampton. I haven't seen any work similar to what I want to make in the region. And getting funding seems the only viable way to build things of your own. And building your own things is a great career starter. Cool. Those are all really great and valid reasons to be applying. Yes, creative and artists should be paid. Yes, starting things on your own is incredibly difficult. Matilda, they're talking a little bit about kind of like a lack of representation maybe from your city and your region. We all have like many different reasons for applying for funding. And those reasons overlap, and it can be very difficult to kind of tease out those reasons and put them in a structure that is gonna make a lot of sense to funders. What I want to try and get across is, maybe I'll go to the next slide and then I'll talk about it. So these are kind of, when funders are asking that question of like, why do you want funding? These are kind of the questions that are kind of behind that, really. I think a lot of artists, we actually start thinking about the how and the what before we think about the why. We get very excited by an idea that we don't quite know why, and we want to explore it and figure it out, and those types of questions. Funders are very interested in the why, and probably interested in the why first before they're interested in how your project is going to be incredibly interesting and dazzling. So I've written kind of 3 almost versions of that question. So there's, who do you want your work to benefit? There's, what problems does your project solve? And there's, how does your project add value? So you, as a funder and as someone applying for funding, you need to become comfortable thinking about your projects in these terms, in terms of thinking about who's getting something from this? What problem do you want to solve? So in, oh, sorry, Joseph, you posted something as well. I'll get to that in a second. With Matilda's thing, kind of talking about like, nobody's making this work in Wolverhampton. That's a start to answering some of these questions. So who do you want the work to benefit? People in Wolverhampton. What problem does your project solve? Underrepresentation of artists in Wolverhampton. How does your project add value? The work that you're doing is going to have these benefits for the people living there. Yeah. So, is anyone comfortable kind of maybe sharing how they think they would answer those questions for their own projects? I realize I've just kind of thrown that at you, but has that helped anybody kind of change the way they're thinking about just immediately? Is anybody like, oh, okay, that's how I'd answer that question? I'm thinking we can use those as examples. If not, I can talk about some examples from projects I've been involved with. But does anyone want to have a go at answering those questions for their own projects that they're thinking about? Yeah, Joseph.
So this is something I've been thinking about more, because when you, as I said, I make comedy films, and so can often seem at first like I don't know, some people I think see it as a waste of time just because it's entertainment and because it can be escapism. But I do think that's quite valuable. But more and more recently with my scripts, I've just been unintentionally commenting on certain issues. So now, rather than just being wacky screwballs like they used to be, they're more and more having some kind of message behind them, even if it's hidden behind several layers of daftness. So, for example, Apocalypse Cow is kind of about the ethics in like the meat industry and whether or not it's better for the planet to go vegetarian or vegan. I say kind of because it's mostly about 2 cows staging a revolution on a farm.
Amazing. What I found really interesting in the way that you answered that, so it kind of, that'll happen in stages. I could kind of be like, oh, it's helping solve social issues, and then like almost immediately you'll reinforce the question, like, hang on, which specific issues? And you want to try and follow those internal questions as far down as you can, like your initial thing, and then ask why again, and kind of keep interrogating that until you feel like you're getting to kind of, I guess, the deepest version, or maybe one up from that. I imagine the deepest version for everyone is just like to make a better society. Go one up from that, like what specific way are you trying to improve society? So that can be, it can be about improving people's mental health. It can be about raising awareness of a prominent issue. It can be about changing people's minds. It can be about all sorts of different things. It can be about addressing a skills gap in other artists at your own level, and things like that. Did anyone else want to have a go at answering that question about their own project? Going once, going twice. Cool. That's totally fine. Next slide. This is the most text I've got on any slide, so I apologize for that. So tokenism, authenticity, and saviors. It's probably the most controversial one that I've got as well, but I think particularly with early career artists, it's also really useful to talk about this stuff. Funding is geared around the idea of solving problems and adding value to some extent. Some funds like developing your creative practice. They are just about you, your art, make your art better. But kind of even then, that it's about solving the problem that there aren't enough artists making exciting work, right? So the way funding thinks about itself is that it solves problems and it adds value. People will want to fund ideas that happen with communities that you are part of. I don't know if anybody's going to SIPO's workshop later on today about imposter syndrome, but like if you're part of communities, those communities are valid and valuable, and they deserve work to happen in them. That can be your geographic communities, it can be your communities of interest, it can be your communities of identity. Those communities are valid, and try, when you're thinking about particularly participatory projects, think about that as kind of the communities that you're going to be working within. Other people and organizations will want to include you and or your communities in their funding bids. This happens a lot. It's not necessarily wrong, but there are right and wrong ways to do this. You guys are going to come across the term parachuting quite a lot in your artistic careers, which kind of describes usually a larger organization. They will see a fund that is, for example, specifically looking at, I'll use my community as an example, looking at like how to support trans people in developing their stories. So there might be a big storytelling project involving it. Larger organizations might kind of see that. They might not necessarily have ties or links to the trans community, but they will succeed in that funding. They will start doing a project that is kind of for the trans community without thinking seriously about legacy, without thinking seriously about the kind of power dynamics that are being reproduced there in terms of who's a participant versus who's an artist, right? Like the participant are the people being helped, the artists are the people doing the helping. If trans people are the ones being helped, should they be artists? There's lots of problematic stuff in there and around there. And that's going to be useful for you to be aware of when you're thinking about your personal identities and your communities. People or funders want to fund work where you guys live, where you guys are, whatever communities you're a part of. They want to fund people in those communities to do the work as well. But the way that funding is geared is sometimes quite competitive. And that's going to mean that sometimes we have these kind of issues of tokenism, of maybe you'll be invited just to advise, but you won't be paid appropriately. These kind of practices are kind of, they're around. So I want to make you aware of that. And then also, like, on the flip side, with like some of these projects that you're thinking about and talking about, there are right ways to do this as well. If there's an issue that you just think you feel really exceptionally passionate about, it's new to you, you don't know a whole lot about it, that's still absolutely fine for you to want to run projects about that and be thinking about that. This last point I've written, so artists are everywhere. If you think you want to help a group of people or solve a problem which you aren't already a part of, find the artists from that community, help them develop their own ideas and solutions, and work with them, work collaboratively with them. If you're an artist and you're like, look, I just really want to talk about, I don't know what it's kind of I just want to really talk about like mental health in the traveler community, and I'm really trying to find people who care about this. I can't find any other artists who want to care about this. Then like talk with people in that community about what they want, whether they want your involvement. If they do, they might want some level of kind of like They might want to form a steering group that helps develop the project. So you can still be working as an artist in those communities, but be thinking about the power relationships, be thinking about who is in charge of the direction of the project. And if you're not necessarily the person who's going to be affected by the project after it's finished, maybe that shouldn't be you. Maybe somebody else should be the person thinking about the direction that the project should take, the legacy of the project, etc. That's the heaviest slide in this whole thing, I promise. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on to thinking about Arts Council stuff in particular? Cool. Right. God, I'm doing so much talking, guys. It's fine. Is anybody bored of my voice yet? Are people happy for me to just keep talking? Cool. All right. Thanks. I'm just glancing at the time as well. I didn't time this workshop before I came in. So we've got another 5 minutes before I'll ask about the break. From current slide. Simple proposals. So this is starting to think about how you structure your ideas. As I say, a lot of how you think about your projects, the ideas all come together, and you won't necessarily be used to kind of thinking about them in the logical sequences that funders need you to talk about them in. You want to go from a sentence that's like, oh, it's going to be circus on the streets of Worcester, and that's going to be really important because circus doesn't happen in Worcester, and it's going to involve all of these great people, and oh, it's also going to happen in like this event. That's how our brains kind of function. When you're thinking about funding, you need to try and find a way to make things more logical. I'm starting with this because the funding forms are terrifying. This is basically what they ask. In the simplest way imaginable, this is what they ask. And I encourage you guys to think about these within your own projects before you do the funding applications. And even if you decide not to use funding for your project, because when you're generating a simple project that answers these questions, that's going to be useful for talking to partners about your project. It's going to be useful for involving other artists about the project. It's probably going to help you think about your project and convince people why it's worthwhile. I put why at the start for like the reasons we just kind of talked about. That's kind of quite a key question for funders. I'm going to expand on those questions a little bit more now so that you guys can see a little bit of just how directly they feed into what the funding questions actually are. PowerPoint does all of this magically. I'm not a visual person at all. I clicked on something called design ideas in the corner and it just did this. It was a list. It was really ugly. So yeah, so this is simple proposals, slightly expanded. So when you're thinking about your idea, why is this important? Evidence of need, I'll talk to you a little bit more, but that's a kind of almost a jargon term that's going to come up. You don't have to always have a lot of it, but if you want to be successful in your funding applications, you should have some kind of evidence that this is something that's wanted and needed. What are you hoping to do? So goals and what you'll do to achieve them. I think particularly if why is this important ends up being about kind of a problem. What are you hoping to do about it? Those goals are a little bit about what you're doing to address it. So why is this important? Might be there's no artist making work in Wolverhampton and that needs to change. What are you hoping to do? Increase the number of artists working in Wolverhampton around this kind of theatre, etc. Who is it for? So that's starting to think about your participants and your audiences. Who are you is a good question. Thinking about your experience, also thinking about who's doing it with you and why they're good people to involve. Probably relating that to like, why is this important? They might be important in that conversation. When and where, fairly simple. How will you do it? Will eventually turn into your project plan. How much will it cost? Will eventually turn into your budget. And how will you know it works? Eventually turns into questions about evaluation. I'd say that if you do these simple proposals well, sorry, first water break. If you're doing these simple proposals well, then this will translate into a bunch of different funding applications that you might be interested in applying for. This will translate very well and very quickly into the Arts Council. It will translate just as well and quickly into the community fund, into private trusts and foundations and those kind of spaces. I think I'm gonna, does anybody have any questions on that as a thing? Does that make sense? Yeah, Paige, hi.
Hi, that looks really cool, by the way. I just wanted to ask, so obviously when you fill out forms, pretty much everyone will be writing all of those things. Like those are the tick boxes that everyone needs to like fill out. But is there something else you should be doing, writing, saying, adding to like make your form stand out? Or is it better to just stick to the sort of structure there and like just let the project speak for itself? Or is there like anything else that we can be doing to make our project stand out?
Yeah. The first thing to know, not everyone does this. I think most people don't, is the honest truth of it. I tend to focus a lot on funders in general actually really like clean, simple language. They're not particularly interested. The more adjectives I think you have in your funding application, it might be a sign that it's a weak application. I think you do need to let your project speak for itself. And I think to make your project stronger, sorry. I would say what you want to do is just ask these questions more deeply and do something to help address them. So we're going to be talking about evidence of need on the other side of this break if people want it. But that is kind of, it's about proving why this project is necessary. A very basic or a rushed project will just say, people have bad mental health. And that will be the reason. But like a more developed project will be like, well, I'm working with this specific community. I've been talking to them personally. This is what they have said. These are the specific obstacles that they are struggling to overcome. And this is what they've said they want to do about it. So I'd say it's about asking those questions more deeply. Is there anything else that helps strengthen it? I'd say clarity is the other big thing. I put bullet points in my applications and in my successful applications, that's what's in there. I'm going to skip a slide ahead. These three, open up the kind of proper thing. So why is this important? What are you hoping to do? An evaluation. The relationship between those three, I think is incredibly important. And you want to make that like as crystal clear as you possibly can in terms of this is what's needed, this is what I'm doing, this is how we will know that it works. To the extent that I will literally, I will just list, this is what's needed. The next question will be like, this is a list of what I'm going to do with numbered codes of which needs it helps address. And then under the evaluation, I'll be like, these are the methods I'm going to be using numbered against which aspects of the activity they're relating to. And I think that's kind of it for how you're writing the application. I'd say there are definitely other things that you can do in terms of, we're going to talk about risk in a little while. We're going to talk about how funders kind of think about measuring risk and how you can essentially persuade them that, persuade is the wrong word, how you can demonstrate that you're not a risk. Basically, how you can demonstrate that you're not going to flee the country with their $8 grand and have a great holiday, but also how you can prove that you're not going to mismanage anything, you're not going to get invoices lost, etc. There are ways that you can do that. But again, I'd say that for the way that you write, just clarity, simplicity, yeah, and just try to, I don't know, I've lost words. How do people feel about a 5-minute break? Thumbs up means you want the break, or thumbs up means you're happy to carry on? Want the break. Okay, cool. Let's have a 5-minute break then. I will stop the video. I think the recording is going to carry on. But I'll see you guys back here. Cool. We're about on time. We're maybe slightly over time. So I'm going to do my best to... I'm not going to say talk faster, because that's already a bit of a problem. Maybe speak less or with more clarity. Sorry, I skipped ahead in the presentation. You guys don't need to see that yet. So, irritatingly, this was going to be an interactive slide, but you all just got to see what was at the bottom of it. How do you guys, so I talked a little bit in the last slide, in the why is this important, I talked about evidence of need. I'd say that's one of the most important things to kind of be clear on, is why your project is needed and necessary. Do you guys have any ideas or suggestions for how you prove that your project is needed? Henry's looking very thoughtful. Yeah, Henry.
Yeah, I guess. Oh no, actually, no. I was just about to repeat what was on the slide, really. So that's answering your question.
That's all I've got planned anyway. So we might as well do. Yeah, so you can prove evidence of need in a number of different ways. Here are some suggestions. So we've got surveys and questionnaires. Successful pilot activities proves that. If you've run a version of the project and it was super successful, that suggests that it's needed and wanted. You can talk about initial conversations. Ooh, I thought that break was going to mean my voice was okay. I'm not sure it is. Initial conversations with partners and participants can go in there. I've kind of put that in there because the first thing I said was surveys and questionnaires. That's because that's how my brain works and operates. Doesn't have to be that logical and statistical necessarily. Some funders will maybe prefer you to be statistic heavy. Arts Council isn't particularly one of those. So it's totally fine to just say, I've had some chats and people have said it sounds like a good idea. It's totally fine. Don't say you've had chats and people have a good idea. You say like, I've had a number of initial scoping conversations with potential partners and participants, and they all suggested that this is a vital project which will help achieve blah, 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 etc. Yeah, plain and simple language, not necessarily colloquial language. Although something that I tend to do actually is that I'll write an application quite colloquially first and then convert it into that kind of speaking, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. Open up the chat. For some funders though, do you need to prove that you've had those chats? Yes, I'd say yes. Something that Arts Council gives you the opportunity to do is to attach supporting documentation. It's quite common for artists to attach a letter of support, and that might be from a partner organization that you've been talking with. You could, if you want to, you could ask them to include details in that supporting letter about consultation exercises that you've been undertaking. Sorry, my housemate just walked past and I couldn't resist saying hello. Yeah, so I'd say that. And some funders might ask you for some degree of proof. I'd say that's not usually going to be, that might be like a follow-up question. That might be like, oh, it's we're taking this to a panel. where most funders end up, is that you submit the application, there's an initial like, has this broken one of the rules? No, cool, send it to a panel. Usually art form specific, they'll look at it, they'll talk about it, and they'll be like, yay or nay. So maybe if it's about to reach that panel stage and they have a question, they might come back to you and be like, we just want to check that you're not lying to us. Who have you spoken to? What proof do you have? But I'd say that's not necessarily standard, although you will end up in all sorts of problems if you do lie about that. If you say you've had conversations with a bunch of partners and they've all said, yeah, we think this is great and we're happy to work with you, and then they say no, that you will end up in trouble. Yeah. And then also maybe just like some statistical data and information about the issue that might not be specific research that you've done, but like for instance with Wolverhampton, if you just produce some statistics about like the number of artists working there, that kind of research exists. I have a research data brain, but that's not what this workshop is, so I'm not going to talk too much about how to find data. Okay. We talked about this, that relationship. It's really important to have that be super strong and important. What the Arts Council wants. This is the section that I'm going to try to condense so that we can talk more specifically about the forms rather than generally what Arts Council want. Important things to know. Arts Council has a strategy. It's called Let's Create. It just got introduced. It is the strategy to cover 2020 to 2030. It got introduced and then pandemic immediately happened. So it hasn't affected a lot of how Arts Council's forms look. They still look exactly the same as they did before, except there's a tick box to be like, which of our outcomes are you trying to meet? It's public. I'd encourage you to just go and look at it on the website. It's structured around these ideas. So there's 3 outcomes: creative people, about supporting artists; cultural communities, about supporting kind of places; and a creative and cultural journey, which I don't think intuitively is about strengthening arts organizations and making sure that they are resilient and various other things. That's kind of more organization focused. And the investment principles, ambition and quality, dynamism, flexibility, trying to fund work that can survive long-term. Environmental responsibility is new and is more heightened than it was in the last strategy. So is inclusivity and relevance. I'd say those 2 areas, they kind of became more important during the last strategy, but they were kind of, they weren't quite embedded as much in Arts Council as they are now with this strategy. So I'd say those 2 areas, they're going to be much more important as Arts Council kind of introduces new funding programs, maybe changes the forms and changes the questions on those. You're going to see questions that are more linked to those 2. I think you guys are in a great position to be thinking about. Yeah, Henry.
Hi, sorry to stop you. I just could you like finish what you're saying, because I'm finding it really interesting, but once you're finished, could you talk to us a bit more about dynamism, please? Because that to me that sounds like quite an ambiguous and general sort of term. I don't really know what the specifics within that are. So
well noticed. I'll let you know when I know. No, not quite. No, I think what's important to think about this is how Arts Council is doing everything for the next 10 years. This is how it's investing in organizations. This is how it's thinking about its relationship with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. This is how it's thinking about its relationship with libraries and museums, which you're not necessarily going to encounter. So I'd say that dynamism, it's an investment principle that they are going to be thinking about. They want organizations and artists which have the skills to survive technological changes and ecological changes that are going to be coming in the next decade. They want organizations which have business models that means they're not going to go bust. Obviously, the pandemic really kind of tested and highlighted how vulnerable a lot of business models in the creative and cultural industries are. So one of Arts Council's kind of big things is thinking about how can we make our organizations that they'll use words like nimble and flexible, and they mean like ability to change under pressure, basically, and that organizations aren't going to be massively dependent forever on incredibly large grant money, is kind of what dynamism is about. I was talking about inclusivity and relevance and environmental responsibility. I think you guys are in a really great position, not necessarily with the projects you're thinking about now, but just in terms of thinking about your careers and over the next 10 years. Organizations are slow. Organizations are they're gonna take a while to adapt their structures and their strategies to include these new terms that they need to be thinking about, and coming with new strategies and new policies and new projects and all that kind of stuff. You guys are coming at this completely fresh, and you can just look at that and be like, cool, environmental responsibility, I'm gonna do this, go. And I think that's something you're gonna come across kind of in the next 10 years, is that kind of individual practitioners, artists, particularly socially minded artists, are kind of gonna be, you're gonna feel quite often like you're ahead of the curve a little bit, like you're kind of dragging the Arts Council and everybody else with you. Environmental responsibility, like artists have been thinking about that more for years, and kind of that's still not necessarily like a question in the forms. So you can spend hours and hours and hours thinking about that right now, but it's not a question in the forms of how are you being environmentally sustainable. It will be eventually, I'm fairly sure it will be. Yeah, you guys are going to be ahead of the curve a little bit on that. But that also means you're going to be in a great position to, once those changes happen, you can be like, cool, we're the only people who are ready to apply for this grant money. No one else is prepared. So yeah, just something to be thinking about in terms of your long-term careers and what you're thinking about in there. Whew. Okay. I was going to try and talk less quickly and maybe give my throat a rest, and that hasn't worked. This is something else to look at. This is short term. In response to the pandemic, they have released these equality objectives, 5 equality objectives. Check them out. These are specifically how they're different priorities for the next until March, if you're applying before then. These are things that they're specifically focusing on and looking at. I'm quite excited by a lot of this. Seeing an organization like Arts Council using terms neurodivergent, using anti-racist rather than what I'd say has been used for the past 10 years, which is kind of talking about unconscious bias, which is a much more bland, less committal kind of terminology. I think this is really exciting that Arts Council is thinking this way and talking this way. There's a chat message. Ooh. Sorry. Yes, Pearl, to answer your question. So I write short stories and make cross-stitch embroidery tapestries about the environment, climate grief, folklore, and what symbols can communicate these issues. I want to raise funds to get a loom so I can create bigger tapestries in response to these issues. Learning a heritage skill to do so. Do you think it would be possible to get a loom using Arts Council funding for this kind of thing? Yes, equipment costs are completely valid as a thing. Arts Council has a very big guidance library. So if you can kind of see it at the top of the slide I've got now. There's a section on the website called Guidance and Resources. There's a whole section on equipment. The last time I checked, they didn't fund second-hand equipment, but they will fund equipment. I can't remember if there's like a percentage limit, like you can apply for 20% can be for equipment, whatever it is. But it's completely valid to spend the Arts Council's money that way. But I would say don't make that the only thing that's in the application. Talk about the whole project. Talk about what you talked about there, about writing short stories and making crotch tapestries about the environment, and kind of make it about that, and make the loom just a kind of core part of what you're saying you need, particularly in the budget. But generally, when think about more about like the project and what that's trying to achieve, what you're trying to achieve with those tapestries, depending on whether you're thinking about like oh, I'm going to talk to a bunch of people to get those tapestries, and that might be the part of the thing, and it's like a bit of a communal, like everybody's sharing in that process together. That could be really nice. Or you could maybe focus on where the tapestries are going to go after, and be thinking about like, oh, how am I going to make sure people see these and get a heightened sense of the issues that you're fantastically encapsulating and talking about with something as interesting as tapestry. So yeah, absolutely yes. You can. I have no idea how much a loom costs. Technically, project grants have a limit of £100,000. If a loom costs more than that, no, you can't get it from Arts Council. Hopefully it costs less than that. I haven't even mentioned that yet, God. Project grants have two different levels, under 15 grand and over 15 grand. We're gonna look at the forms in a second. Pretty much apply for an under 15 first and then apply for an over 15 is generally how people do it. Technically you can, I think, apply for an over 15. You're very unlikely to get it if it's your first application, because they will just be like, we have no reason to suspect that you can manage a budget of this size. Unless maybe you're transitioning from another career where those budgets are very standard for you. I don't necessarily think anybody in here is in that situation, but maybe somebody watching on YouTube might be. Then that might be feasible. Whew, okay. Yeah, familiarize yourself with the Let's Create strategy. Familiarize yourself with these 5 equality objectives. They will help you understand generally the direction that Arts Council is going, which is useful to bear in mind, as well as what they're looking for right now in their forms, which is what we're going on to, the forms. This has been lovingly borrowed from a website called The Uncultured. They are fantastic. There's a slide at the end of this is just useful resources. I'd say a third of the links are from that website. This talks about just some of the differences between Arts Council's National Lottery project grants and developing your creative practice. Does previous work you've done in terms of project management validate you in your first individual application? Answering Matilda's question in the chat, yes. One of the questions is about your previous experience with management, and that is where you should talk about your experience producing. Yes, there's an entire question about it that you should be talking about. Don't worry if you haven't done that. For everyone else, I'm going to talk about how you address kind of gaps in your skills in a little while. So the forms, the main differences. Yeah, wasn't a waste of time, Matilda, don't worry. Sorry, forms and the differences. You can kind of see they're very similar. Developing creative practice is just for individuals, and it's for a slightly smaller amount of money, so it's from 2,000 to 10,000. And a lot of what I've said maybe doesn't necessarily apply in developing your creative practice. There, the immediate beneficiary is you as the artist, by developing your creative practice and what you want to do and making sure that you're developing. Arts Council National Lottery project grants, the benefits are usually others. It's normally you as an artist using your practice to help something or someone in some way. So those are the kind of the essential differences. Developing your creative practice has deadlines that runs in rounds, but they're rolling as deadlines. And Arts Council National Lottery project grants does not have any deadline, but you should definitely set yourself one so that you don't work on it forever. Oh, I haven't talked about that anywhere. In terms of like how long you should spend on your funding application, that's a really difficult question to answer. I spent 9 months developing my only unsuccessful funding application, and that was a horrifying experience. And then like another one that was successful, I spent 2 weeks on. Like it's really, really difficult to figure out the right amount of time to spend on it. I'd say getting to the point where it's good and valid. Don't overinvest to the point where if you don't get it, it's going to put a serious dent into your well-being and your career. Maybe. Should have thought how to express that better. Sorry. Short answer, there isn't a good answer for how long to spend on the form. Not 9 months, probably more than 2 weeks. Cool. I'm going to show you guys the forms. Yay. We finally got there with 17 minutes to go. So these templates are also from that website called The Uncultured. Oh no, I'm going to show you this first. Okay, so this is Grantium. This is the website that Arts Council uses to process applications. It's hideous. It's horrible to use. It has a bad habit of timing out on you, and it's down for maintenance quite regularly. When you're coming up with your applications, don't use it. Use a document and then copy your answers in later. But just to show you a little bit of how it looks. Oh, I've logged out. Okay. I don't think anybody will be able to see my password here. Ignore my old name before I came out as trans. Thank you very much. Okay. I once started an application about a spoken word library. Excellent. Looks something like this. They will ask questions. The main menu is kind of over here. So these are all of the different sections. There's details about you, your addresses and stuff. These are the 4 main sections. So quality, public engagement, finance, and management. They give you a bit of guidance at the start of each section. There is a huge document called the How to Apply Guidance. There's lots there. The questions look like this. There's character limits. The first question is, tell us about your relevant work experience. Tell us more about the project and what you want it to achieve. Tell us how this project will help develop your work. So you can see the questions that we had in our project proposal lead quite easily into this. Public engagement is here. Is it aimed at a specific group of people? So that who is it for in terms of project and participants? Kind of becomes relevant here. Then there are questions here. Who will engage with your project? How will people engage and what experience do you want them to have? How will you reach people? Essentially marketing and recruitment. The finance sections are the ones that I would strongly recommend you don't do on here initially because the interface is quite unfriendly. So it does some fancy calculations for you, but this is the bit that you're interacting with. You're adding items to a list. You're saying this is private income. Someone gave me a quid. £1, save and back to list. And now we can see that, oh, apparently this project was going to cost £3,080. And I've got £1 of extra income that I've announced there. That's a little bit how that works. I'm not going to show you too much more of that. Basically, set up an account and start looking at it is the only way to think about it. I will share with you the Google Docs, which I strongly recommend you to use instead. I'm going to show developing a creative practice because I have a feeling that's where more of you are leaning at the moment. It's just a Word document. It's got all of the same information. So this is the kind of stuff that was on there. Activity dates. These are their main questions on that. So they're a little bit different and they're much more focused on you. So the first question is, tell us about yourself and your creative practice. Very broad and open. Tell us about the development opportunity you want to undertake, what you hope to get out of it and how you will go about it. Blending a few of those questions from the proposal there. So the goals of what you hope to get out of it and how you will go about it, more of kind of the project plan type question. Why is this important for your practice at this point and how will this help create future opportunities? Again, thinking about that why question. Public engagement is not a real question in this one because again, the main beneficiary is you rather than participants or audiences. It's kind of a tick box to say how you think this will lead in the long term to people engaging with your work. There's a tick box about let's create, which I talked a little bit about. And then there's attachments. And a little bit of finance questions about how much money you want, a budget, the formal activity plan. And then this is kind of a equal opportunities monitoring. That's what that form looks like. It's shorter than the project grants one, which I'll also show you. There's kind of only really 3 chunky questions there. You get quite a lot of space to talk about it. So 1,800 characters to tell them about you and your work. 1,500 characters to talk about what you're going to be doing with the money that they give you, the development you want to take. And 1,500 to talk about why it's important, particularly at this point. That's the important thing to notice about that question. It's asking why is it important? It's also asking why now, which is another way of thinking about the why question. Why is now the right time for you? Do you have more time because you've just very fortunately been made redundant? Do you, have you just come into some money that's going to let you buy a loom? Like, why is right now the right time for you? And those are the kind of the key questions. You know, there's a little bit more about the budget, but those are the 3 core questions. Someone has posted in chat. Really sorry, but I'm going to have to go. That's absolutely fine. No worries. Bye, Paige. Thanks for coming. Cool. That's what developing a creative practice looks like. You can kind of maybe see why I started with just that question that just had the 1-word questions. It gets scarier the closer you get to filling in the actual form, but the questions are literally the same. It's all just kind of a scary looking website with interfaces that aren't familiar and uncomfortable, but it's the same questions and it's the same information. And don't let the kind of structure of the forms intimidate you, really. They're really basic, simple questions. Answer them in the same way. I'm going to share the project grant one with you just to show you what it looks like. It's a little bit longer. So those sections that I talked about, so quality, public engagement, finance and management, they're here. Much more formally in this one than in developing your creative practice. So there's questions about quality. Tell us about your work. What are you going to do and what will it achieve? I like that that's together. So that lets you kind of talk about your goals, and then it lets you talk about what activity you're particularly doing under those goals. So you might structure that.
Sorry, Hazel, I think you need to share the browser window. We're
What
still
allowed?
in the Word doc.
I think that might have been just the wrong, I don't know. I was still kind of, it was the Word doc that I was hoping to share, but maybe it wasn't sharing the new one. Hopefully this is the right thing.
Yeah.
Can everyone see the same Word document now? Yeah? Hopefully, fingers crossed. I don't know. Yeah, again, this is just another template. It's freely available. It's in the useful resources section at the end. I will ask Steph to kind of email you guys the slides as well, so you will definitely have that. You'll be able to revisit all of this. There's those questions. Quality questions. Who is involved is a little bit of a section that I hadn't talked about. So you get to talk in quite a lot of length about who your partners are going to be. If you're applying as an individual, like there needs to be a name on the thing. If you're part of a collective, but you're not a formal organization, that can be difficult, and you might need somebody to come forward to be the lead applicant. But this gives you room to talk about the other people who are part of your collective, what their experiences are, and what their expertise is. etc. Public engagement, more lengthy questions here than in the other one. Who will engage? How will you engage? Tell us how you reaches people. Again, I kind of showed these in Grantium itself, but this is just what it looks like in a Word document. It's quite a lot nicer. I'm going to talk about pay in a second. Management asks about your partners, asks about you and your partner's experience in managing activity. There you are, Matilda. This is where you get to talk about your experience as a producer at length. Yeah, so this is all, again, it looks scary, but it's the same types of questions. I feel like I'm running low on time, so I'm gonna stop sharing that. Something on the useful documents, I'm just gonna show this really quickly. Arts Council is doing a much better job of being more accessible these days, and something they do is they produce easy read versions of almost all of their major documents, which is fantastic. So I'm going to show you, they have an easy read for National Lottery project grants. The guidance document is something that you should try to read in full. It's incredibly useful, and it has paid references. This is an easy read version of that. I recommend just starting with this. It makes it incredibly easy to understand, which is the point. So I'll put a link to this document. It talks very candidly about what it's for. It talks about those short-term changes that we talked about. So there's some pandemic-specific changes. Basically, it's easier to apply now than it used to be. Normally, you'd need to get 10% of the project money from somewhere else. You don't have to right now because money is gone. Talks about those 4 criteria, and he talks about them just, again, like in a really easy way to understand. Quality is the first part of the form. Tell us about your past work. Public engagement talks about this. It's very reassuring, like your project might not be about reaching people straight away, and that's okay. You can talk about that in there. It might be about time to think and plan, in which case tell us about how people will benefit in the future. They know that the current situation makes finding money very hard. You don't have to have the 10% match funding anymore. Support in kind is a term that you'll see in all sorts of funding situations. It means free things or free time that other people are giving you to help your project, but things that would normally cost money. If you're working with a venue and they're giving you free rehearsal space, ask them how much that rehearsal space would normally cost. Ask them what the most they would normally charge for it is and include that as support in kind. And you communicate that in the income questions. So you represent that as income. That can be people's time as well. So that can be if a mentor is supporting you on the project, then you can talk about that there. Do you include payment for yourself, including the time you put in before being successful, i.e. all the planning time, etc. You do include payment for yourself in the expenditure. They can't fund planning time before it's happened. They can't do retrospective funding. So yeah, that's kind of here. We can only pay for costs that happen during your project. We cannot fund costs that have already occurred or past losses. So they can't fund you for the planning time, again, which is part of why I'm saying make sure you don't spend 9 months on your funding application. There is an access fund, which I'm going to talk about as well. Actually, let's just go back to that. You get the idea. There's an easy read. It's very good. Go and read it. I'm going to jump back to the presentation. The access budget. I'm going to go back to paying yourself and others. So it can pay for the cost of support workers, adaptive technologies, counselors, travel costs, or any costs related to mental or physical health conditions. The access fund can be for costs incurred to apply. It can be to pay a support worker to help you through it. It can be to have a sign language interpreter like interpret what you're saying and put that into the form itself. It can be for mental health stuff as well. So it can be for like a counselor. If you're, if that's something that you think you're likely to need, if you're going to be able to manage your project, then you can include that in the access budget. And you can include that from the point you're thinking of starting to applying, not just the point where the project starts. So that's the exception. They can fund access costs that you incur before you apply, but they can't fund the time you spend in those meetings. Meeting partners, they can't fund the time that you're spending writing emails to people and those types of things. On the access budget, it can be yourself or for your participants. So this is something that was quite important to think about as well. Like if you're thinking of working with a particularly vulnerable group of people, put aside some access budget and think about what their needs are likely to be. Ideally, ask them what their needs are likely to be and then include it in the access budget. It can fund all sorts of things. It can fund respite breaks for like parents and carers and stuff. It can fund interpreters to be in the room with you, which is just a really useful thing to be doing anyway with your work. If you're going to be doing performances, just include an access cost to have a BSL interpreter on the stage interpreting what's happening. Or in your films, pay a professional to do audio description of your films, for example. All of that can be in the access budget. People don't use the access budget nearly enough. Again, hopefully some of you are going to CPO's workshop on imposter syndrome. You can definitely apply for it. It is for you. It is for you and your access needs. It's also for the access needs of the people you're working with. It's assessed separately to the rest of your application, and it doesn't count towards, when I talked about under 15 and over 15, the under 15 grand form is shorter than the over 15. You can apply for 15 grand of project costs and another 10 in access costs if it's a particularly access intensive project, and it will still get assessed at under 15. And it's different people who will look at that. You're not necessarily going to get a room full of people who aren't disabled, who are just thinking about the artistic quality of your project, and not the same people who are going to be assessing whether your access needs are valid. It's different people looking at it with different specialisms. It's really, really good. Please apply for that. I'll go back to paying yourself and others, just because I think it's important. I know we're running out of time as well, sorry. Hopefully nobody minds if we overrun by a few minutes. Cool, I think I'm mostly looking at Steph there actually. Am I about to get kicked out so that the next project can start? Okay, cool. I will breathe a little easier now. Paying yourself and others. Arts counselling exists to support professional artists. This now includes you. Congratulations, you are now a professional artist. If you're looking at applying for an Arts Council grant, you're a professional artist. Most people are paid day rate or half day rate, just so you know. That's what, when you ask people, what will it cost to have you involved in my project? Most people will quote you a day rate or a half day rate. Rarely will they quote you an hourly rate. It's just how things operate over here in the creative and cultural industries for some reason. Arts Council aren't allowed to recommend rates for artists anymore due to kind of like a competitiveness thing, because there's such a dominant thing. Like if they set recommended rates, it's quite hard to deviate from them. Anywhere between 100 to 300 pound a day is ordinary for lead artists, depending on your experience level. So £100 a day, if you do the maths, works out at about £12 an hour. So it's kind of just above living wage in most situations. I'd never recommend paying anybody lower than that, particularly if they're a freelancer, just because there's additional costs on top of regular living wage. If you're a freelancer, you're potentially paying into your own pension, you're covering all of your own national insurance. So I'd say never kind of really going below that £100 a day for anyone in your project who is a freelance worker working on a project is the thing. I put 300 as the upper limit here. I've asked people to be involved in projects before who have quoted higher than that, who've quoted kind of £400 a day. Those are usually people with exceptionally specific knowledge who are maybe involved in quite a limited capacity. They're maybe only going to be there for a couple of days rather than the lead artist. like 200 to 250, I'd say, is what most lead artists end up getting paid on Arts Council applications. This last point is really important, and I really want to stress it to you guys. Arts Council do want value for money, but they don't want you to devalue yourself. Arts Council, it's the artist development agency for the country. They want this to be a country where artists are able to pursue these careers. They want everybody to be able to step into a career in the arts. And part of that is making sure that artists get paid well. They don't want you to talk about how you're going to be doing hours and hours and hours of voluntary work to make this project happen. Commitment is good, but just like write in what that is actually going to cost. Value yourself as much as you're valuing everyone else in your project. Written this here, these aren't tortured genius funds. That's not who they're trying to fund and support. They're not trying to fund people who are going to just, I don't know, sit in their rooms and spend an eternity kind of unpaid labor on this stuff. That's not who they're after. They want the arts to be a vibrant and valid part of the economy of this country. And that means paying yourself appropriately. Please pay yourselves. I feel like I've been talking for a while, quite quickly, because I was worried about time. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? There's a couple more slides left. Briefly checking chat in case I missed something. Yep, awesome. Risks and gaps. So this is where we talk about what Matilda was saying about, like, oh, there's a question about your experience of managing projects before. Or there's also a question about your experience of managing budgets before. There's also a question about your experience of making art before. When you're asked those questions, I have two principles. Don't lie and don't be alone. So when I'm saying don't lie, I'm basically saying don't pretend that you have. Partially because if you want to answer those questions properly, you want to be providing evidence for it. You want to say where you worked, how long you worked there for, what types of projects you manage, what types of budgets you manage. But also, it doesn't matter that much. Arts Council is completely comfortable funding emerging artists. They're completely comfortable funding people for the first time who've never done this before. That's part of what they have to do, obviously. What they do want to do is fund people who are being honest about what those limits are and are talking very tangibly about what you're going to be doing about it. So if you have no management experience, what you might be looking at doing is being like, okay, I do craft. Maybe there's an organization like Craft Space who have lots of project management experience. I'm going to ask them if they can recommend anybody to me as a mentor on this project who can help me with that, who's going to sit down with me once a month, go through this horrific looking spreadsheet that I've had to put together with my project plan and help me figure this stuff out. That's what they want. That's the kind of stuff they want to hear. They want to hear that you've seen a gap in your experience, you have reached out to somebody to help you, and that help has been confirmed. That's what they want to see. That's how they mitigate risk, is by being like, okay, we've never heard of this person before, but we have heard of Craft Space and we've heard of this mentor that they've recommended. They think this person is worthwhile. They think this person is worth investing in. They are willing to support and help this person. Cool, so are we. That's how they're making those types of decisions. I'd also say generally, even within project grants, developing a creative practice didn't always exist. It's relatively new. But even within project grants, they're still interested in how your project will be developing you as a person and as an artist. They're still interested in how this is going to help you get more skills. They're still interested in how this is going to help support your career. They're still interested in how it's helping your art. Including a mentor is probably a good idea in every single one that you're applying for. Just do it. And just, I'd say don't be shy about the level of person that you want to be your mentor. Get a wish list, rank it, start at the top and work your way down, is what I'd honestly recommend doing. Because surprisingly, people quite like mentoring as well. It's quite a rewarding experience. And particularly like if you're applying for Arts Council, you can pay them for that time. And people also like to be paid. So that's like, yeah, ask for I don't know, like the kind of tapestry masters of the country. Ask them to be your mentor in an email or in a phone call. Be like, I'm applying for this thing. Are you willing to be my mentor? How often could we meet? What is your day rate? Ask those questions and include it in the bid. And that's going to be really helpful. I can't remember if there's anything else I wanted to say on risks and gaps. I think that was it. Oh yeah, asking for advice. I talked about this earlier on. So right now, you can only ask for advice online from Arts Council. Obviously, nobody's meeting in person and nobody's in the office, so their office numbers aren't connected. But you can ask for online help if you're applying for it. When I'm saying that, what kind of help you can ask for, quite often it's eligibility questions. So being like, I have this thing on my budget. Is it okay for you guys to fund this specific thing? It'll be questions like equipment. Again, digital and film, that's an area where it could be worthwhile when you've got your budget together being like, is this okay for you to fund, or do I need to be talking to the BFI about this? And there are other examples around that where that'll be good. The guidance library that the Arts Council have is absolutely huge, and it's incredibly useful, or I found it incredibly useful. A lot of those documents have easy read versions or are on their way to having easy read versions as well, so it's getting more accessible all of the time. When you're filling in the application, I'd recommend just having the guidance document open next to it, because they talk really clearly and explicitly about how they want you to answer the questions and the type of information they're looking for. I talked about relationship managers a little bit earlier. There are humans on the other side, and they do want to help. Arts Council and all of these major funders, they want art happening. They want art happening everywhere, for everyone, and they want it to be good art. So talk to them, and they will find ways to help you and to support you to make what you want to make and all that stuff. Welcome to the useful resources slide. I'm trying to remember if any of these don't make sense. Get grants Get grants I talked about at the very start. They're like a local organization. They have a funding database. They also, they're a consultancy service, so they help organizations and individuals understand their funding. They have blog posts that they write about most of the major trusts and foundations and funds that are available. That might be a little bit further down the line for you guys if you're thinking about applying as an individual. But if you ever join an organization or form an organization, those blog posts have been incredibly helpful for me. Often they're the only resource I've found about really obscure charities that don't have websites. They'll, like, Get Grants will have a blog post about them and be like, oh yeah, this is what they care about and this is what they want to fund. And that's been incredibly helpful. Arts Council have a page of other sources of funding that lists the organizations I talked about at the start. It also lists the big trusts and foundations, the ones who have really good websites and really clear application processes. Again, that might be a little bit further along than where a lot of you guys are, but it's worth knowing and thinking about. I've got these three. So I've got This is Live Art, I've got Writing West Midlands, and I've got Screen Skills on there. Basically, in addition to Arts Council, there's quite often development agencies who are interested in your specific art form and your specific location. And lots of them will have all sorts of professional development opportunities, and some of them will also offer funding, which can be really great. And some of them might be able to offer funding on a smaller scale than Arts Council, which can be really useful if you feel like, if you just feel like I can't do it yet. £1,000, which is the smallest amount you can apply for, is so much money. I don't know how I'd use it. Then one of those groups might be in a position to offer like a smaller amount of money for a smaller project. Just build up your confidence of managing those types of things. Everything else on there has been something that I've shared already during this. And that's it from me. I'm done talking. Does anybody have any questions? Apparently I've done an excellent job if nobody has a single question about the entirety of funding after my presentation. Cool. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, if there's no questions, it's just time for me to say a massive thank you to you, Hazel, for such a useful session. I think everyone's going to be going away with lots to think about, lots of really practical steps to take when starting to make funding applications. So should we all show our appreciation for Hazel in whatever way you want to do that? Love it. I love it. Yeah, thank you, Hazel. It's absolutely brilliant. I really appreciate your time in doing that. Just following on from everything that Hazel's spoken about, and there are a couple of ways that Culture Central can help as well when you're looking at applying for funding. A key one is that we do actually have a mentoring scheme, and we can match you up with somebody who's kind of experienced in applying for different funding streams. So if that's something that you think would be useful to you, I'm going to pop a link when I finish talking. I'm going to pop a couple of links into the chat, and it's literally fill in a form that's like 3 questions, and we'll should be able to match you up with somebody that can help you. And you know, for some people that is literally sit down for a quick Zoom, or for some people, you know, you might want somebody to sit with you and really help you through the process, and you know, potentially we can help you with somebody to do that for you. The other thing is we do have a weekly newsletter. I don't know if you already receive it, but if not, it's really useful. I say that because I write it, but it comes out every Thursday, and it's got all sorts of stuff in there, like any kind of commission opportunities that we spot around the region, any specific new funding streams that we see coming up, and just kind of general news to keep you up to date with any opportunities that are available, what's going on in the sector, just to keep you informed. I think a lot of people find that quite helpful. So I will put that in the chat. In fact, I'll put them in now. 1 sec. I've got them all ready. Before you go, so you've got the link for the mentoring scheme and the link for the newsletter. Also, just to say, there's quite a few other workshops this week which were completely sold out, but because we found that some people were unfortunately signing up for them and then not turning up, we've actually increased the capacity just this morning. So if there's anything that you fancied seeing in the rest of the week that was sold out, if you go have a look now, you may well be able to get a place for another session. There's lots of other really great stuff. So yeah, it just remains for me to say thank you again, Hazel, so much for a fantastic session, and thank you all for coming along. Enjoy the rest of the day, and hopefully we will see you soon. Bye everyone. Thank you for coming.
Didn't know if I was meant to stay for any kind of debrief at the end.
No, I just wanted to say thank you again.
No worries. I'm not going to watch that recording. I'm going to pretend it didn't exist. But yeah, happy to help.